The storm began like a whisper, a gentle patter against the weathered slats of the old shed. But nature rarely whispers for long in these parts. Within minutes, rain hammered down in silver sheets, wind howling through cracks in the wooden structure as thunder cracked overhead like God's own fury. Inside, a young woman's scream pierced through the cacophony, her body convulsing on a makeshift bed of blankets spread across rough-hewn planks. "It's coming, Thomas. The baby's coming now." Thomas Palmer pressed a cool cloth to Elena's forehead, his weathered hands steady despite the storm raging both outside and within. A kerosene lamp swung wildly from a hook overhead, casting frantic shadows across the small space. "Breathe, child. Loretta will be here soon. Just breathe." Lightning struck nearby, illuminating the shed in a brilliant flash. In that frozen moment, Elena's eyes locked with Thomas's terror and determination battling within her gaze. The thunder that followed seemed to shake the very foundation of their sanctuary. "I don't think we have time to wait," her voice barely audible above the storm. 23 years later, Sarah Palmer gripped her steering wheel tighter as her ancient Honda sputtered to a stop. Rain drummed against the windshield in an eerily familiar rhythm, though she couldn't place why it unsettled her so. The timing couldn't have been worse. Fired from her design job that morning, her son dozing in the back seat, and now this. A fitting end to the worst day of her life. "Mom, are we home?" Daniel's sleepy voice came from behind, 7 years old and already too familiar with her worried expression. Sarah forced a smile into the rearview mirror. "Just a little car trouble, buddy. We'll be moving again soon." The lie tasted bitter. Nothing would be moving soon. How? Not the car, not her frozen bank account, and certainly not the eviction notice taped to their apartment door. 30 days. That's all they had left before they'd be homeless. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call. The bank again. Sarah let it go to voicemail. What could she tell them that they didn't already know? That the graphic design company she'd worked for had gone under without warning. That her emergency fund had evaporated after Daniel's hospital stay 3 months ago. That she was one missed meal away from complete desperation. The rain intensified, matching the pounding in her chest. Sarah rested her forehead against the steering wheel, allowing herself 5 seconds of weakness. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then she straightened, she wiped her eyes, and turned to face her son with renewed determination. "Let's call Uncle Mike to pick us up. And guess what? I think we deserve ice cream for dinner tonight." Daniel's face lit up, his small worries momentarily forgotten. If only adult problems could be solved with dessert, Sarah thought, as she dialed her brother's number. The legal letter arrived 3 days later, bearing the seal of Madison County Probate Court. Sarah almost tossed it with the growing pile of bills, but something made her pause. The name Palmer caught her eye, not hers, but Thomas Palmer, her grandfather. She tore open the envelope, scanning its contents with growing disbelief. Thomas Palmer, deceased 6 months prior, had left her his farmhouse and surrounding property in Riverdale. The same grandfather she'd only met a handful of times during childhood summers, whose face had grown fuzzy in her memory. The same property her mother had always refused to discuss, changing the subject whenever it came up. "What's that, Mom?" Daniel peered over her shoulder, homework temporarily abandoned. Sarah's mind raced with possibilities. A house, land, something that couldn't be taken away by creditors, something that could be sold. It's a fresh start, maybe. By nightfall, she'd called the attorney listed in the letter, researched Riverdale population 312 3 hours away, and pulled up satellite images of the property. The farmhouse looked weathered but substantial, sitting on nearly 5 acres of land. Remote, isolated, far from everything familiar. But it was theirs, free and clear. Sarah paced the small apartment, calculations running through her head. Sell it immediately and clear her debts. Try to make a go of it there. The local elementary school had decent reviews online. Housing costs in Riverdale were a fraction of the city's. Maybe. She stopped pacing when she noticed Daniel watching her, worry etched into his small face. Sarah knelt before him, taking his hands in hers. "How would you feel about an adventure living in a big old farmhouse with lots of room to play outside?" Daniel's eyes widened. "Like in my books, with secret passages and hidden treasures." Sarah laughed, ruffling his dark hair. "I don't know about all that, but it's a real farmhouse that belonged to my grandfather. We could fix it up, make it our own." "What about my friends in school?" The question stabbed at her heart. "You'd make new friends, and I'd be there with you every step of the way." Daniel considered this with the serious expression he wore when contemplating important matters. Finally, he nodded. "Will we have a garden? Can I get a dog someday?" The simplicity of his request brought tears to her eyes. Yes to the garden, maybe to the dog, we'll see. That night, after Daniel had fallen asleep, Sarah sat at their small kitchen table with a notepad making lists. What to take, what to sell, what to leave behind. The severance package from her job would cover moving expenses and a month or two of living costs. After that, she'd need to find work. Not easy in a small town, but she could freelance remotely if necessary. It wasn't a perfect plan, it wasn't even a good one, but it was the only one she had. The Welcome to Riverdale sign was faded and tilting slightly to one side, much like Sarah's hopes as they drove through the sleepy main street. The town seemed frozen in time, a hardware store with a striped awning, a diner with chrome trim, a small library housed in what appeared to be a converted Victorian home. Everything closed on a Sunday afternoon. Daniel pressed his face against the window, taking it all in with the unfiltered curiosity of childhood. "It's like a movie set," he whispered. Sarah checked the GPS again. 3 more miles to the property. The knot in her stomach tightened with each passing landmark. What if the house was uninhabitable? What if this was all a terrible mistake? The road narrowed as they left town, winding through gentle hills dotted with wildflowers and ancient oaks. When they turned onto a gravel drive, marked by a weathered mailbox bearing the name Palmer, Sarah's breath caught. At the end of the long drive stood a 2-story farmhouse, white paint peeling wraparound porch, sagging in places but still standing proud against the afternoon sky. "Is that it, Mom? Is that our house now?" Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Their house, their chance. As they pulled up to the front, Sarah noticed a black luxury SUV parked nearby. A man in his 50s, impeccably dressed in what appeared to be a tailored suit despite the rural setting, was examining the exterior of the barn. He turned at the sound of their car, his expression shifting from annoyance to calculated interest. "You must be Thomas's granddaughter," he called, approaching with an outstretched hand. "Frank Whitmore. I own most of the commercial real estate in Riverdale." Sarah stepped out, instantly aware of her travel-worn appearance next to his polished exterior. "Sarah Palmer, and this is my son Daniel." Frank's gaze swept over the property, barely acknowledging Daniel's wave. "I made your grandfather many offers for this place over the years. Stubborn man." A pause, then a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'd be happy to take it off your hands. Save you the trouble of dealing with." He gestured vaguely at the dilapidated structures. "All this. It's no place for a woman alone." The dismissal in his tone ignited something in Sarah. "We'll manage just fine, Mr. Whitmore, but thanks for your concern." Frank's smile tightened. "Of course, just being neighborly. My offer stands when you realize what you've gotten yourself into. Old houses like this, they hide all sorts of problems." He handed her a business card. "Call me when you're ready to discuss terms." As he drove away, kicking up dust in his wake, Daniel tugged at Sarah's sleeve. "I don't think he's very nice, Mom." Sarah pocketed the card, watching the SUV disappear down the drive. "No, honey, I don't think he is." The house key felt heavy in her palm as they climbed the porch steps. The door creaked open, revealing high ceilings, hardwood floors dulled by years of neglect, and furniture draped in white sheets like patient ghosts. The air smelled of dust and abandonment, but underneath was something familiar. Old books, wood polish, a hint of pipe tobacco. Thomas. They wandered through rooms filled with remnants of a life long lived. A grandfather clock frozen at 317 bookshelves lined with leather-bound volumes, a kitchen with a cast-iron stove that had probably been modern sometime around the Korean War. Every surface held a thin layer of dust, but nothing appeared damaged beyond repair. "Can I explore upstairs?" Daniel's excitement was palpable, his earlier concerns forgotten in the adventure of discovery. "Stay where I can hear you, and no opening windows or doors until we check them." While Daniel bounded up the creaking staircase, Sarah continued her assessment. The plumbing worked, though the pipes groaned in protest. The electricity functioned, illuminating fixtures that hadn't been updated since the 1970s. The roof had several visible water stains, but no active leaks. It was livable, barely. She'd need to prioritize repairs based on safety first, then weatherproofing before winter arrived. A sharp cry from upstairs sent her racing up the steps. "Daniel," she found him in what must have been a guest bedroom, kneeling on the floor where he'd pulled up a loose floorboard. "Look what I found, Mom." In his small hands was a yellowed piece of paper with a childish drawing of stars connected by lines almost like a constellation. Scrawled at the bottom in faded pencil, "Palmer's Secret 1952. Sarah examined it, turning the paper over to find it blank on the reverse. "Where exactly did you find this?" Daniel pointed to the gap between floorboards. "It was stuck in there. Do you think there's buried treasure?" Before she could answer, a knock at the front door echoed through the house. Sarah tucked the paper into her pocket. "Let's go see who that is, treasure hunter." An elderly woman stood on the porch holding a covered dish. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, deep lines mapping a life of expressions across her face. Despite her age, she stood tall with alert eyes that missed nothing. "Thought you might be hungry after your journey. I'm Loretta Jenkins, live just down the road." She thrust the dish forward. "Chicken pot pie, still warm." "Thank you, I'm Sarah Palmer, and this is my son Daniel." Loretta's gaze softened as it landed on Daniel, then sharpened again as she studied Sarah's face. "Thomas's granddaughter. I'd know those eyes anywhere." A pause. "He'd be pleased you came. He was waiting, waiting for the right person to find the truth." Sarah blinked, caught off guard by the cryptic statement. "The truth. May I come in? My knees aren't what they used to be." Over coffee served in mismatched mugs found in the kitchen cabinets, Loretta filled them in on practical matters. Which plumber wouldn't overcharge, where to find the freshest produce, which parts of the house Thomas had managed to update before his health failed. She spoke of him with the easy familiarity of an old friend. "Were you and my grandfather close?" Sarah ventured. "Neighbors for 60 years. I was a nurse back then, helped deliver half the town's babies." Loretta's eyes took on a faraway look. "Thomas was a good man, kept to himself mostly, but always there when someone needed help. I barely knew him. We visited a few times when I was young, but then my mother—" Sarah trailed off, realizing how little she actually knew. She never wanted to talk about this place. Loretta nodded as if this confirmed something. "Rebecca, or should I say Elena, had her reasons." The name hit Sarah like a physical blow. "Elena, my mother's name is Rebecca. Is that what she goes by now?" "Interesting." Loretta set down her mug. "Not my story to tell, dear, but perhaps it's time you asked her directly." Before Sarah could press further, Daniel burst into the kitchen, eyes wide with excitement. "Mom, I found a key. It was hidden behind a picture frame in the upstairs hallway." He held up an old-fashioned iron key, ornate and heavy. Sarah examined it, turning it over in her palm. "Did my grandfather mention anything about locked rooms or storage spaces?" she asked Loretta. The older woman's expression remained carefully neutral. "There's the shed out back. Thomas was particular about it. Kept it locked, maintained it better than the house toward the end." "Can we go look, Mom?" "Please." Daniel was practically vibrating with anticipation. Loretta stood, gathering her purse. "I should be going, but Sarah—" She placed a weathered hand on Sarah's arm. "Thomas left things the way they are for a reason. Whatever you find, remember that." After Loretta departed, Sarah stood on the back porch, staring across the overgrown yard at the structure in question. Unlike the traditional red barn further out, this was a smaller building, its wood weathered to a silver gray. Something about it pulled at her memory. A dream, perhaps, or a story told long ago. "Race you there." Daniel was already halfway across the yard before Sarah could protest. The shed door was secured with a heavy padlock, rusted with age but still functional. The key slid in with surprising ease, as if it had been waiting for them. The lock released with a solid click that seemed to echo in Sarah's chest. "Ready?" she asked, hand on the door. Daniel nodded, bouncing on his toes. The hinges protested as Sarah pushed the door open, sending a shiver of rust into the air like amber snow. The interior was dimly lit by dust-caked windows, a workbench running along one wall cluttered with tools from another era. Everything was coated in dust and cobwebs, yet strangely organized. Hammers hung in size order, jars of nails, and screws neatly labeled handplanes arranged by function. "Whoa," Daniel breathed. "It's like a museum." Sarah ran her fingers along the workbench, leaving trails in the dust. Something felt odd about the space, though she couldn't immediately identify what. The walls were lined with pegboard holding various tools. The floor was solid wood planking, worn smooth in paths between workspaces. A pot-bellied stove sat cold in one corner. Then it hit her. The ceiling and walls were insulated, not with modern materials, but with layers of newspaper and what appeared to be woolen batting all carefully installed and maintained. Far more insulation than a simple tool shed would require. Mom, look at this. Daniel was crouched near the stove, pointing at the floorboards. This one moves. Sarah knelt beside him, examining the plank he'd indicated. It shifted slightly under pressure, unlike its neighbors. Using a nearby screwdriver, she carefully pried up the board, revealing a narrow space beneath. Inside lay a wooden box, intricately carved with vines and the initials TP. Her heart hammered as she lifted it out. The box was heavier than expected, crafted from oak, with brass hinges that had developed a rich patina. The clasp released with gentle pressure as if recently oiled. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, lay bundles of letters tied with twine, their paper yellowed with age. Beneath these was a leather-bound journal, its spine cracked from use, and at the very bottom, wrapped in a handkerchief embroidered with wildflowers, a tarnished locket. Daniel peered over her shoulder, uncharacteristically quiet in the face of their discovery. Sarah carefully unfolded the top letter, her hands trembling slightly. The handwriting was elegant but firm, each letter precisely formed in faded blue ink. My dearest Elena, if you're reading this, you've found your way back, though I pray it's under better circumstances than when you left. I've kept everything as it was. Your hiding place, Marcus's drawings, even that wobbly floorboard he was so fond of jumping on despite my protests. Some might call it living in the past, but I prefer to think of it as keeping faith with the future. The shed remains our secret, just as we promised. Sarah's vision blurred as she continued reading. The letter spoke of hardships endured, of a young woman seeking refuge, of a child named Marcus, who loved to draw stars on the walls when he couldn't see the real ones. It spoke of a baby born during the fiercest storm of 1952, of sacrifices made and promises kept. With shaking hands, she set aside the letter and reached for the journal. Opening to a random page, she read April 12, 1952. Elena's cough is worse today. Loretta brought medicine, but we dare not take her to a doctor. The Harringtons have eyes everywhere, and Elena fears they'll take Marcus away if they find them. The boy asked again why they can't go outside during daylight. How do you explain to a child that his very existence is seen as shameful by those who should love him most, that his mother chose him over comfort and acceptance, and pays the price daily? Sarah flipped through more pages, her confusion mounting. The Harringtons. The name tugged at something in her memory. Her mother had mentioned them once dismissively when Sarah had asked about her maternal grandparents. Not worth knowing, had been the terse reply. Carefully, she unwrapped the locket. It was small, oval-shaped, with a delicate letter E engraved on its face. The clasp was stiff but yielded to gentle pressure. Inside, protected by glass, was a tiny photograph of a newborn baby, eyes squinted against the world, wispy dark hair visible beneath a knitted cap. Sarah's hands trembled so badly she nearly dropped it. Something cold and certain settled in her stomach as she turned the locket over. Scratched into the back, in tiny, precise letters, Sarah Orta Elena, born in a storm and strength, May 4th, 1952. Mom, are you okay? Daniel's voice seemed to come from far away. Sarah stared at the infant in the photograph, at herself, as decades of half-formed questions crystallized into a single impossible truth. She hadn't been born in Memorial Hospital, as her birth certificate claimed. She had been born here in this shed during a storm to a woman named Elena, who had later become Rebecca, her mother. I was born here, she whispered more to herself than to Daniel. In this shed. Daniel's eyes widened. For real, that's so cool, like a secret hideout, baby. The innocence of his response startled a laugh from Sarah, breaking the spell of shock that had settled over her. I guess it is pretty cool in a way. She carefully returned the locket to its wrapping and placed it along with the journal and letters back in the box. I think we need to ask Grandma some questions. As they stepped back into the sunlight box tucked securely under Sarah's arm, the farmhouse looked different somehow. Less a desperate last resort and more a repository of answers to questions she hadn't known to ask. Who was Elena before she became Rebecca? Who was Marcus? And why had her mother kept this part of their history buried for so long? The shed door locked behind them with a definitive click, as if acknowledging that some secrets once uncovered could never be hidden again. That night, after settling Daniel in a bedroom that might once have been her mother's, Sarah sat at the kitchen table with the contents of the box spread before her. She'd spent hours reading through the journal entries and letters, piecing together a story that seemed impossible yet explained so much. Elena Harrington, daughter of Riverdale's wealthiest family, had fallen in love with Jake Morrison, a mechanic from the wrong side of town. When she became pregnant with Marcus, the Harringtons had given her an ultimatum: give up the baby for adoption and the unsuitable relationship, or be cut off completely. Elena had chosen her child and the man she loved, only to lose Jake to a workplace accident months later. Destitute and desperate, scorned by her family and shunned by most of the town, she had found unlikely sanctuary with Thomas Palmer, who had once worked as a groundskeeper for the Harrington estate. He had converted his tool shed into a living space, insulating it against the harsh winters and prying eyes alike. Elena and young Marcus had lived there in secret for nearly 2 years. Then came the storm, the baby, Sarah, and eventually their disappearance. Thomas's journals grew sparse after their departure, though he occasionally mentioned receiving a letter or call assuring him they were safe but unable to return. The final journal entry was dated just weeks before Thomas's death. I've left everything as it was in case Elena, Rebecca as she calls herself now, ever finds her way back. More likely it will be Sarah who discovers the truth. I've seen her only a handful of times, always under Rebecca's watchful eye. But there's something in the girl that reminds me of Elena before the world tried to break her. That same stubborn light. If you're reading this, Sarah, know that your beginning may have been complicated, but it was built on love and courage. Some might call that a solid foundation. Sarah closed the journal, her mind racing. She needed to call her mother, but what would she say? Hey, Mom, guess what I found in Grandpa's shed? Me. The absurdity of the situation hit her all at once, and she laughed until tears streamed down her face, the sound echoing in the empty kitchen. When the laughter subsided, she wiped her eyes and reached for her phone. 4 missed calls from the bank. One from her former boss, probably about final paperwork. None from her mother, who still didn't know they'd made the move to Riverdale. Sarah hesitated, her finger hovering over Rebecca's contact. It was late past 11. This wasn't a conversation to have when exhausted emotions raw from discovery. Tomorrow. She would call tomorrow, after processing everything, after figuring out what questions needed asking most. Instead, she dialed Mike, her brother, who answered on the second ring. Please tell me you didn't drive off a cliff on your way to Hicksville. Sarah smiled despite herself. We made it. The house is livable. Barely. That bad? No, just neglected. Nothing some elbow grease can't fix. She paused, uncertain how to continue. Mike, did Mom ever talk to you about this place, about Grandpa Thomas? A pause on the other end. Not really. You know how she is about the past. Why? Sarah's gaze drifted to the open journal. Just curious. Listen, if she calls you looking for us, would you mind not mentioning where we are right away? I need a little time to settle in. Sarah, what's going on? You're being weird. I'm fine, we're fine. I just found some old family stuff that's got me thinking. She forced brightness into her tone. Daniel's already talking about getting chickens. Can you imagine? The conversation shifted to safer topics. Daniel's school transfer, Mike's new girlfriend, their mutual friend's disastrous haircut. By the time they hung up, Sarah felt more grounded, the revelations of the day settling into a manageable shape in her mind. She carefully returned the journal and letters to the carved box, but kept the locket out, studying the tiny photograph in the dim kitchen light. Her birth, it seemed, had been both a beginning and an ending. The start of her life and the catalyst for Elena's departure from Riverdale and transformation into Rebecca Palmer, single mother with a carefully constructed past. The sound of floorboards creaking overhead reminded her that some secrets would need to wait. Daniel was her priority now. Whatever her mother's reasons for hiding the truth, whatever history lay buried in this house, and shed, Sarah's first responsibility was ensuring her son had the stability and safety she herself had always craved. She slipped the locket around her neck, its weight unfamiliar, yet somehow right, and headed upstairs to check on Daniel. Morning arrived with a chorus of birdsong and the realization that coffee would require a trip to town. The kitchen was equipped with a percolator that might have been cutting-edge technology when Eisenhower was president, but the cabinets yielded no actual coffee. Daniel, however, was undeterred by such practical concerns. He burst into her room at 6:30, already dressed in mismatched clothes pulled from half-unpacked suitcases. "Mom, I found a blueprint in the closet. I think it shows secret passages," Sarah groaned, pulling the quilt over her head. "Indoor voice, buddy. In what closet?" "In my room. Come see." 15 minutes later, Sarah stood in Daniel's designated bedroom examining what appeared to be an original floor plan of the house dated 1898. The yellowed paper showed the basic structure they had explored yesterday, with one notable exception: a narrow passage connecting the basement to the backyard terminating near the shed. "See secret passage? Can we go look for it, please?" Sarah studied the blueprint more carefully. If this was accurate, there was a concealed door in the basement that led to an underground tunnel. The practical part of her brain immediately worried about structural integrity, water damage, potential collapse. The part that had stayed up half the night reading about her mother's secret life wondered if this was how Elena had moved between house and shed without being seen. "We'll look, but no exploring until I check if it's safe." "Deal," Daniel agreed enthusiastically, racing ahead down the stairs, while Sarah carefully rolled up the blueprint. The basement door was located off the kitchen, its wooden steps creaking ominously as they descended into the cool, damp space below. Unlike the cluttered basements of modern homes, this one was largely empty. A few storage shelves holding dusty mason jars, an ancient washing machine, a workbench similar to the one in the shed. The floor was poured concrete, the walls fieldstone, everything lit by a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. According to the blueprint, the hidden door should be in the north wall behind what was now a set of metal shelves. Sarah moved them aside with Daniel's help, revealing what appeared to be solid stone. "It's not here." Daniel's disappointment was palpable. Sarah ran her fingers along the wall, feeling for inconsistencies. Near the floor, the mortar between stones felt different, crumblier, less weathered. She knelt for a closer look. "Daniel, hand me that flashlight from my pocket." The narrow beam revealed subtle differences in the stonework, a roughly rectangular section where the mortar lines didn't quite match the surrounding pattern. Sarah pressed experimentally against different stones until one shifted slightly under her hand. "I think I found something," she murmured. Further investigation revealed a cleverly disguised door designed to blend seamlessly with the basement wall. Years of disuse had sealed it shut, the mechanism stiff from neglect. It would take tools and time to open safely, neither of which they had at the moment. "We'll come back to this," Sarah promised, noting Daniel's crestfallen expression. "But first we need food, coffee, and cleaning supplies." Town trip. The promise of exploration later mollified Daniel enough to get him into the car. As they drove the now familiar route into Riverdale, Sarah mentally cataloged what they'd need for the immediate future: groceries, cleaning and supplies, basic hardware for minor repairs. The severance check had cleared, giving them a temporary financial cushion, but every purchase would need careful consideration. Riverdale's Main Street looked marginally more alive on a Monday morning. The hardware store was open, its windows displaying an eclectic mix of modern tools and vintage agricultural implements. The small supermarket occupied what had clearly once been a five and dime, its original tin ceiling, preserved above fluorescent lighting. As they navigated the narrow grocery aisles, Sarah became aware of curious glances from other shoppers. Small towns had long memories, and the Palmer name clearly meant something here. Whether that something was good or bad remained to be seen. At the checkout, the middle-aged cashier studied Sarah's face openly. "You must be Thomas's granddaughter. Got his eyes, you do." Sarah nodded, uncomfortable with the scrutiny. "Yes, we just moved into the farmhouse yesterday." The woman nodded knowingly. "Brave of you taking that on alone. Frank Whitmore's been after that property for years. Offering cash too, from what I heard. So I gathered when I met him yesterday." The cashier lowered her voice. "Watch yourself with that one. Old money, new ambitions. Doesn't like being told no." She brightened, turning to Daniel. "And who's this handsome young man?" While Daniel basked in the attention, Sarah processed the warning. First Loretta, now this woman. Everyone seemed to have an opinion about Frank Whitmore, none of it particularly flattering. What was so special about her grandfather's rundown property that attracted such persistent interest? Their next stop was the hardware store, where the proprietor, a man in his 60s with calloused hands and keen eyes, introduced himself as Harold Jenkins, Loretta's son. "Mom mentioned you'd arrived, said you might need some help getting the old place in shape." He leaned against the counter. What's first on the west roof plumbing, Sarah explained her immediate concerns, securing the house basic repairs to make it safely habitable, winterizing before cold weather arrived. Harold listened attentively, offering practical advice and fair prices on essential supplies. Thomas was a good customer right up until the end. Kept that shed of his in better shape than the house itself, Harold commented as he rang up their purchases. Used to joke it was the only thing keeping him tethered to this world. Sarah carefully kept her expression neutral. It does seem well maintained compared to the rest of the property. Mom says you're planning to stay. Got work lined up. The question was asked casually, but Sarah recognized its importance in a community this size. Newcomers were categorized quickly: asset or burden contributor or taker. I'm a graphic designer. I can work remotely for clients in the city, but I'm also looking for local opportunities. Harold nodded thoughtfully. Riverdale Historical Society has been talking about updating their materials website too. Might be worth a conversation with them. I can put in a word if you'd like. By the time they left the hardware store, Sarah's shoulders had relaxed incrementally. Two positive interactions, potential work leads, and a car full of supplies, progress, however small. As they pulled back onto the gravel drive of the farmhouse, Daniel suddenly pointed through the windshield. Mom, look. Someone's at our house. A silver sedan was parked in front of the porch, a woman in her 40s examining the peeling paint with a clipboard in hand. She turned as they approached, her professional smile not quite reaching her eyes. Sarah Palmer, Lisa Mercer, Riverdale Building Inspector. I've had some concerns raised about the safety of this structure. Sarah's stomach tightened. Concerns by whom? That's confidential information, ma'am. I'll need to conduct a full inspection of the premises, including outbuildings. She glanced toward the shed, particularly that structure which I understand has been significantly modified from its original purpose. The timing was too coincidental, the focus on the shed too specific. Frank Whitmore's warning echoed in Sarah's mind. Old houses like this, they hide all sorts of problems. Do you have documentation for this inspection? I wasn't notified. Lisa's smile thinned. Emergency inspections don't require prior notification when public safety is concerned. Now, if you'll allow me inside, Sarah stood her ground. I'll need to see some identification first, and I'd like to call the county office to verify this inspection was properly ordered. A flicker of annoyance crossed the inspector's face, but she produced an ID card. While Daniel watched wide-eyed from the car, Sarah made a show of examining it, then pulled out her phone. What's the number for the county office? After a tense conversation with the bewildered clerk at the county building department, who confirmed Lisa Mercer was indeed an inspector, but seemed confused about the emergency authorization, Sarah reluctantly allowed her inside. The inspection was methodical and pointed. Electrical systems, structural supports, plumbing with particular attention to areas that would be expensive to repair. When they reached the shed, Sarah's anxiety spiked. The box was safely hidden upstairs, but the loose floorboard was still evident, the space beneath exposed. This structure has been significantly modified, Lisa observed, running a hand along the insulated wall. No permits on file for such work. That's a violation. The modifications were made over 50 years ago, Sarah countered. Surely there's a statute of limitations on permit violations. The inspector made a non-committal noise, scribbling on her clipboard. I'll have to research that. In the meantime, I'm noting several code violations that will need to be addressed within 60 days, or the property will be considered uninhabitable. Sarah's heart sank as the list grew longer. Outdated wiring, inadequate ventilation, questionable structural integrity of the back porch. All legitimate concerns, but the timing and intensity of the inspection reeked of outside influence. When Lisa finally departed, leaving behind a preliminary report highlighting dozens of required repairs, Sarah slumped onto the porch steps. The estimated costs far exceeded their meager savings, even with her doing much of the work herself. Daniel sat beside her, small hand patting her arm. Are we in trouble, Mom? Sarah pulled him close. No, honey. We just got some work to do. That night, after Daniel had fallen asleep, Sarah returned to the shed alone. The space felt different now. Not just a curious relic, but a sanctuary created by her grandfather to protect her mother and brother. Her birthplace preserved all these years, as if Thomas had known she would someday need to discover the truth. She carefully examined the walls, finding faint traces of star patterns drawn in pencil. nearly invisible against the weathered wood. Marcus's constellations drawn when he couldn't see the real stars. Her half-brother, somewhere out there, perhaps not even knowing she existed. The thought galvanized her. She'd come to Riverdale seeking refuge just as her mother had decades ago. But unlike Elena, who had fled, Sarah would stand her ground. This property, this history, this unexpected legacy, they belonged to her and Daniel now. Whatever Frank Whitmore's interest in acquiring the land, whatever secrets still lay hidden, she would uncover them. Sarah traced one of the faded star patterns with her fingertip, the rough wood catching slightly against her skin. "I'm here now," she whispered to the empty shed, to Thomas's memory, to the echoes of a past she was only beginning to understand. "And I'm staying." The next morning she would call her mother. But tonight, in this space where her life had begun, Sarah made a silent promise to the child she'd once been and the one sleeping in the farmhouse, to build something worthy of the courage that had sheltered in these walls during a long-ago storm. Sarah stared at her phone screen, thumb hovering over her mother's contact. The morning sunlight spilled through the kitchen window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. 3 cups of coffee had fortified her resolve, yet the simple act of pressing call seemed monumental. "What do you say to the woman who birthed you in a shed during a thunderstorm, then spent decades pretending it never happened?" Daniel's voice broke her concentration. "Are you calling Grandma?" Sarah set the phone down, grateful for the interruption. "Later. First, let's tackle that upstairs bathroom." The shower looks like something from a horror movie. As they scrubbed decades of grime from tile and porcelain, Sarah's mind kept returning to the building inspector's visit. The violations were legitimate. The house needed substantial work. But the timing felt orchestrated. Frank Whitmore was applying pressure, testing her resolve. By mid-afternoon, the bathroom gleamed, and Sarah could no longer postpone the inevitable. She sent Daniel outside to explore the yard within established boundaries, then settled on the porch swing with her phone. Rebecca Palmer answered on the 4th ring, her voice instantly wary. "Sarah, is everything all right? Mike mentioned you were taking some time off." Sarah watched a monarch butterfly navigate the overgrown garden. "We're fine. Actually, we've moved to Riverdale." The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the sound of her mother's suddenly shallow breathing. "You're at Thomas's house." Rebecca finally managed not a question, but a statement laden with dread. "Yes, Daniel and I needed a fresh start after I lost my job. I was going to sell it, but..." Sarah's fingers unconsciously found the locket around her neck. "We found something in the shed, Mom. Several somethings, actually." Another silence, longer this time. When Rebecca spoke again, her voice had hardened into something defensive and brittle. "I don't know what you think you found, but whatever Thomas kept, it was his business, not yours." "It's my birth certificate, Mom, the real one." Sarah clutched the phone tighter. "And letters, a journal, photos of you and a boy named Marcus." "Leave it alone, Sarah." The warning in her mother's voice was unmistakable. "That life is buried for good reason. I was born in that shed. I deserve to know why." Rebecca's laugh held no humor. "Deserve? You think truth is something we're entitled to? Some truths destroy lives, Sarah. They follow you, haunt you, no matter how far you run." "Is that why we never came back here? Why you became Rebecca instead of Elena?" Sarah pressed. "I'm hanging up now." Rebecca's voice trembled with suppressed emotion. "Get rid of that house while you still can. Nothing good will come from digging up the past." The line went dead. Sarah sat motionless, the phone still pressed to her ear, as if her mother might reconsider, might call back with the explanations she craved. But only silence followed, heavy with decades of secrecy. A small voice from the yard broke her reverie. "Mom, come look what I found." Daniel stood by the garden shed, proudly holding up a rusty metal object. As Sarah approached, she recognized an old hand-crank ice cream maker, the wooden bucket long since rotted away, but the metal components largely intact. "Can we fix it?" His eyes shone with the prospect of homemade dessert. Sarah examined the mechanism, grateful for the distraction. "Maybe. Let's add it to our restoration project list." The afternoon faded into evening as they continued unpacking, organizing, making the house incrementally more livable. When Daniel finally succumbed to exhaustion, Sarah returned to the journals and letters, determined to piece together the story her mother refused to tell. Elena Harrington's fall from grace had been swift and absolute. Pregnant at 19 by the town mechanic disowned by her wealthy family, she'd become a cautionary tale in Riverdale's social circles. Thomas Palmer, the Harringtons' former groundskeeper, who'd known Elena since childhood, had offered sanctuary when no one else would. The arrangement was meant to be temporary, just until Elena found somewhere permanent to raise her son Marcus. But weeks became months as doors closed in her face landlords, mysteriously withdrawing offers after mysterious phone calls, potential employers suddenly having no positions available. Thomas's journal documented it all with meticulous detail. The quiet campaign by the Harringtons to ensure their shameful daughter remained isolated, the whispered rumors spread through town, the failed attempts to find legitimate work. When Elena became pregnant again in late 1951, this time carrying the child of a traveling musician who'd promised to return, but never did, her options narrowed further. Sarah pieced together the timeline with growing dismay. Elena had hidden her second pregnancy from what few acquaintances she maintained, rarely venturing from the security of Thomas's property. On May 4th, 1952, during a violent spring storm, she'd gone into labor 2 weeks early. Loretta Jenkins, then a practicing nurse sworn to secrecy, had delivered the baby in the shed. Sarah Elena Morrison, 7 pounds 3 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and lungs like a freight train, according to Thomas's shaky handwriting. 3 months later, Elena and her children disappeared. Thomas's entries grew sparse, noting only occasional phone calls from untraceable numbers, assurances they were safe but unable to return. The Harringtons had intensified their search, hiring private investigators who'd come uncomfortably close to discovering Thomas's role in harboring their daughter. Sarah closed the journal, overwhelmed by the weight of history pressing down upon her. Her mother had recreated herself as Rebecca Palmer, in a city hundreds of miles away, fabricated a conventional past, and raised Sarah to believe she'd been born in a hospital like every other child, all to escape the suffocating judgment of a small town and the relentless reach of a family that considered her very existence a stain on their reputation. A knock at the door startled her from these thoughts. Through the window, Sarah glimpsed Harold Jenkins' truck in the driveway, his mother Loretta standing on the porch with a covered dish in hand. "Thought you might appreciate a home-cooked meal after a day of cleaning." Loretta offered, extending a casserole dish, still warm to the touch. Sarah welcomed her inside, grateful for both the food and the potential answers this woman might provide. "You spoke with her, didn't you?" Loretta settled into a kitchen chair, declining Sarah's offer of coffee. "My mother, it didn't go well." Loretta nodded, unsurprised. Rebecca, Elena, as I knew her, built walls around herself brick by brick, first to survive, then because she knew no other way to live. "You delivered me." Sarah placed the statement between them, a bridge to the past. "In this very house during the worst electrical storm I'd seen in years." Loretta's weathered hand smoothed her skirt, a gesture that seemed more about self-soothing than tidiness. "You came fast, determined to meet the world head-on. Some babies ease their way into life. You announced yourself with authority." Sarah lowered herself into the chair opposite. Why did they leave the journal entries just stop? The Harringtons discovered where Elena was hiding, not the specifics, but close enough to threaten Thomas with trespassing charges, destruction of his reputation, even jail time if he didn't reveal her whereabouts. Loretta's expression hardened. "Powerful families in small towns write their own rules, my dear. The Harringtons controlled the bank that held Thomas's mortgage, the businesses where he might seek employment, the very fabric of this community. Why were they so determined to find her if they disowned her? They wanted Marcus." Loretta's voice dropped to a near whisper. "Not out of love or concern, mind you, out of control. Eleanor Harrington, and your grandmother, couldn't bear the thought of her bloodline being raised by common folk, as she put it. She'd arranged for Marcus to be taken in by distant relatives in Connecticut, properly educated and groomed, to eventually take his place in the family business. Elena would be sent to a rehabilitation center for unwed mothers until she'd come to her senses and agreed to their terms. Sarah's stomach turned at the clinical cruelty of it all, and when I was born, a second indiscretion sealed her fate in their eyes. 2 children by different fathers, neither of appropriate social standing. It was beyond redemption in their worldview." Loretta reached across the table, her fingers cool against Sarah's wrist. "Thomas and I helped them disappear. New identification, a modest sum to start over, a promise to never speak of what happened here. Your mother became Rebecca Palmer, single mother of one daughter with a bush but respectable story about a deceased husband. And Marcus, what happened to him? He became Michael. Loretta's revelation hung in the air like smoke. Your brother Mike. Sarah's world tilted on its axis. Mike, her older brother by 5 years, the steady presence throughout her childhood, the one who'd driven them to Riverdale just days ago, was Marcus. It seemed impossible, yet explained so much: his darker complexion compared to her pale skin, the protective instinct that had always defined their relationship, the way her mother deferred to him in family decisions, despite her otherwise iron will. Does he know? Sarah managed, her voice scarcely audible. He was almost 5 when you left Riverdale, old enough to have memories, but young enough for them to blur with time and suggestion. Whether Elena ever told him the complete truth, Loretta shrugged. That's a question only your mother can answer. Sarah felt as though she were trying to assemble a puzzle with half the pieces missing. The Harringtons, are they still here in Riverdale? Eleanor passed 10 years ago. Richard followed soon after. The family fortune went to their nephew, Franklin Harrington Whitmore. He shortened it to Whitmore when he moved back here from Boston about 15 years ago, aiming to reinvent himself as a self-made man rather than an heir. Loretta's expression conveyed volumes. Your cousin Frank has been trying to acquire this property ever since. The revelation struck Sarah like a physical blow. Frank Whitmore, the developer pressuring her to sell the man behind yesterday's emergency inspection, was her cousin. The family connection explained his determination to possess the property, to erase the physical evidence of a scandal that had never fully disappeared from Riverdale's collective memory. Does he know who I am? Sarah asked, dreading the answer. I doubt he's made the connection yet. You don't carry the Harrington name, and enough years have passed that the resemblance isn't obvious. But if you stay... Loretta left the implication hanging. Sarah's phone buzzed with an incoming text. Mike checking in. Her brother, Marcus, the boy who'd drawn stars on shed walls because he couldn't see the real ones. Did he remember? Was his concern for her move to Riverdale rooted in more than brotherly protection? What should I do? The question escaped before Sarah could contain it, vulnerability bleeding through her carefully constructed composure. Loretta rose, gathering her purse. That depends entirely on what you want, my dear. If it's peace you're after, selling to Frank and disappearing might be easiest. But if it's truth you seek... She gestured to the journals spread across the table. You've already begun that journey. After Loretta's departure, Sarah sat in the growing darkness, processing revelations that reframed her entire existence. The foundation of her identity, who she was, where she came from, even her relationship with her own brother, had shifted beneath her feet like quicksand. Yet amid the disorientation, something else emerged, a sense of connection to this place, to the man who had risked everything to protect her mother, to the shed where she'd drawn her first breath. She picked up her phone and typed a simple message to Mike. We need to talk, not over the phone. Can you come to Riverdale this weekend? His response came almost immediately. Everything okay? I can be there Friday night. Sarah stared at the screen, uncertain how to answer. Nothing was okay. Everything she thought she knew about herself and her family had been upended. Yet she felt more rooted than she had in years. We're fine, she replied finally. Just discovered some family history I think you should see. The next morning, Sarah woke with new purpose. The house needed work, and the inspection report provided a roadmap of priorities. With Daniel as her enthusiastic assistant, she began addressing the most critical issues: shoring up loose porch railings, replacing faulty electrical outlets, patching the leaky upstairs bathroom plumbing. Harold Jenkins proved an invaluable resource, providing guidance over the phone and stopping by after closing his store to help with the more complex repairs. By Wednesday afternoon, they'd addressed nearly a third of the violations, documenting each repair meticulously for the follow-up inspection. You're making remarkable progress, Harold observed, wiping sweat from his brow after helping install a new water heater. Most folks would have thrown in the towel by now. Sarah tightened the final connection, satisfaction warming her chest as the pilot light ignited. I'm discovering hidden talents, and motivation makes a difference. Daniel bounded into the basement, waving a sheet of paper. Mom, I've finished mapping all the stars on the shed walls. Look. He'd spent hours carefully tracing the faded pencil marks inside the shed, recreating Marcus's imaginary constellations on fresh paper. The result was surprisingly complex, Not random dots, but deliberate patterns forming shapes that almost resembled actual constellations. Harold examined the drawing with interest. Reminds me of the summer sky over Riverdale. See here, he pointed to a particular configuration. That's almost Cygnus, the swan, and this could be Lyra. Sarah studied the patterns with new appreciation. Marcus hadn't just been drawing random stars. He'd been recreating the night sky he couldn't see based perhaps on pictures from books or stories Thomas had told him. Can we go stargazing tonight, Mom? For real. Daniel bounced on his toes, enthusiasm radiating from every fiber of his being. Weather's perfect for it, Harold offered. Clear skies forecast. You've got the ideal spot for it too. That hill behind the shed, away from the town's lights. The promise of this small adventure carried them through the remainder of the day's work. After dinner, they spread a blanket on the gentle slope Harold had suggested, armed with a thermos of hot chocolate and Daniel's star chart for comparison. The night sky unfurled above them, a tapestry of light against velvet darkness. Daniel gasped as his eyes adjusted the true magnificence of the unfiltered cosmos revealing itself in stages. First the brightest stars, then fainter ones, then the misty sweep of the Milky Way arching overhead. It's so much bigger than in the city, he whispered, awe lending his voice a reverence rarely heard from a 7-year-old. Sarah pointed out the constellations she recognized. The Big Dipper, Orion's belt, Cassiopeia's distinctive W shape. Daniel compared them to his chart, excitedly identifying similarities between Marcus's drawings and the actual patterns overhead. Do you think Uncle Mike drew these when he was little? Daniel asked innocently, connecting dots with his finger against the night sky. Sarah froze, unsure how to answer. She hadn't yet explained to Daniel the revelations about their family, about Mike being Marcus, about their true connection to this place. I think he might have, she hedged, buying time. Why do you ask? Daniel shrugged, the motion barely visible in the darkness. The writing looks like his kind of, and there's an MM in the corner of one drawing. Like Michael Morrison, right? That's his name. Sarah's breath caught. Daniel had made the connection himself through the simple observation of a child unencumbered by preconceptions. Michael Morrison, the name her brother used professionally, though their family had always called him Mike Palmer. She'd never questioned the discrepancy, assuming Morrison was a middle name or professional pseudonym. You're very observant, she managed, pride mingling with apprehension. I think there's a lot about our family we're just beginning to discover. They stayed under the stars until Daniel's eyelids grew heavy, his questions about planets and galaxies gradually slowing. As Sarah carried her drowsy son back to the house, a movement near the tree line caught her attention. A flashlight beam quickly extinguished when she turned her head. Someone was watching them. The next morning, footprints in the dewy grass confirmed her suspicion. Someone had come onto the property during the night, circling the shed before departing through the backfield. Sarah photographed the evidence, then called the sheriff's office to report the trespassing. Deputy Collins arrived 30 minutes later, young, earnest, and clearly uncomfortable. He examined the footprints with professional diligence, but seemed reluctant to take official action. Could have been kids, he suggested, pocketing his notepad without writing anything down. We get bored teenagers looking for abandoned places to hang out. Not much excitement in Riverdale. Sarah stood her ground. These are men's work boots, not teenagers' sneakers. And nothing about this property is abandoned. The deputy shifted his weight. I'll increase patrols in the area. Beyond that, he glanced toward his cruiser, clearly eager to leave. Is there a reason you're hesitant to file a formal report, deputy? Sarah kept her tone measured but direct. His discomfort became palpable. No, ma'am, it's just, trespassing is difficult to prosecute without catching someone in the act. And Mr. Whitmore mentioned he had some surveyors out this way recently assessing the watershed area. Might have been them. The casual mention of Frank's name, the implication that his workers had legitimate reason to be on her property, confirmed Sarah's growing suspicion. Frank Whitmore's influence extended throughout Riverdale, including law enforcement. I'd like a report filed regardless, Sarah insisted. And I'd appreciate knowing why Mr. Whitmore's surveyors would be on my private property without permission. The deputy finally relented, completing the paperwork with obvious reluctance before departing with a promise to look into it. Sarah watched his cruiser disappear down the driveway, a sense of isolation settling over her. The property boundaries separated her from neighbors, but Riverdale's invisible networks of loyalty and influence created a different kind of isolation altogether. That afternoon, while Daniel worked on a school assignment, the local elementary had provided materials for him to begin catching up before formal enrollment. Sarah ventured into the basement to examine the concealed door they'd discovered earlier. Armed with WD-40 and basic tools, she methodically worked on the rusted hinges and seized locking mechanism. The door finally yielded with a groan of protest, revealing a narrow earthen tunnel shored up with timbers. Sarah played her flashlight along the passage. It extended roughly 20 yards before ending at what appeared to be another door, presumably exiting near the shed as the blueprint had indicated. The air inside smelled of damp earth and decaying wood. Several of the support beams showed signs of rot, and a small collapse had partially blocked the tunnel about halfway through. It was nowhere near safe enough to traverse, but its existence confirmed another piece of Elena's story, a secret route between house and shed and allowing her to move between them unseen. Sarah was photographing the tunnel entrance when she heard footsteps overhead, too heavy to be Daniel's. Her heart raced as she quickly retreated, pulling the concealed door closed behind her. She grabbed a hammer from the workbench and crept up the basement stairs, listening intently. A man's voice drifted from the kitchen, not aggressive, but not invited either. "Hello, Ms. Palmer. Your door was open." Sarah emerged cautiously, hammer half hidden behind her leg. A middle-aged man in an expensive suit stood just inside the kitchen door, his demeanor professional but presumptuous. "Can I help you?" She kept her distance, body angled, to maintain sight of both the man and the staircase leading to Daniel. James Barton, Riverdale Heritage Council. He extended a business card which Sarah made no move to accept. "I apologize for letting myself in. I knocked repeatedly with no answer." The door was locked, Sarah countered, certain of this fact. She'd become meticulous about security since moving in. His smile wavered slightly. "Perhaps not as securely as you thought. Old houses, temperamental locks." He glanced around the kitchen, assessing. "I've come about your property's historical designation application." Sarah's confusion must have shown on her face because he continued without prompting. "Someone has nominated this property for historical landmark status, specifically that shed out back. It's a rather unusual request." His tone suggested bureaucratic tedium, but his eyes were sharp with interest. "As the owner, you'd need to sign off on the application before we proceed with evaluation." Sarah maintained her composure despite her racing thoughts. She'd made no such application, nor had anyone mentioned this possibility. "Who submitted the nomination?" "Anonymous, I'm afraid. Not uncommon for initial submissions, though we'd need proper documentation and historical significance evidence to proceed." He produced a folder from his briefcase. "The preliminary application cites the shed as a significant site of humanitarian sanctuary during periods of social division," whatever that means. Sarah accepted the folder, mind working rapidly. Someone was trying to protect the shed from demolition or alteration. Someone who knew its history and significance. Loretta Harold, or someone else entirely. "I'll need time to review this," she managed, leafing through the paperwork without really seeing it. "Of course. Though I should mention, historical designation would complicate any development plans for this property." Barton's casual tone belied the weight of his words. "Restrictions on modifications, mandatory preservation requirements, approval processes for changes, quite burdensome for a homeowner. Most find it more trouble than it's worth." The implied message was clear. Historical designation would tank the property's value to developers like Frank Whitmore. "I'll take that into consideration," Sarah replied, escorting him firmly toward the door she knew she'd locked. "Next time, please wait for me to answer before entering my home." After Barton's departure, Sarah examined the door lock, confirming her suspicion. Someone with access to a key or lock-picking skills had entered. She immediately called Harold, who arrived within the hour to install new deadbolts on all exterior doors. Historical designation, Harold mused as he worked. That would certainly throw a wrench in Frank's plans. Sarah leaned against the porch railing, watching him drill the new hardware. "What exactly does Frank want with this property? It's not prime real estate by any stretch." Harold paused, considering his words carefully. "You haven't explored the back acreage much, have you?" When Sarah shook her head, he continued, "There's a natural spring about a quarter mile beyond the shed. produces some of the purest water in the county. Thomas discovered it decades ago, kept it quiet except among close friends. We'd sometimes fill jugs there during summer droughts. A spring, that's what this is about. Not just any spring, it feeds directly into the aquifer that supplies water to 3 counties. Recent testing showed mineral content similar to those fancy European bottled waters people pay premium prices for. Harold finished mounting the deadbolt. Frank's been buying up every property with water rights he can get his hands on. Word is he's in talks with a major bottling company. The pieces suddenly aligned with terrible clarity. Frank didn't just want to erase a family embarrassment by acquiring the Palmer property. He needed it to complete his water rights monopoly. The spring's location explained his particular interest in the shed and surrounding acreage. And if I were to get this historical designation for the shed, Sarah tested the new lock, satisfied with its solid action. It would create a protected zone around the structure, including watershed protections. Harold packed up his tools. Frank couldn't put a bottling operation anywhere near the spring without jumping through impossible regulatory hoops. That night, after Daniel was asleep, Sarah sat at the kitchen table with the historical designation application. The anonymous submission included photocopies of documents she recognized from Thomas's box, carefully selected pages that established the shed's historical significance without explicitly revealing Elena's identity or circumstances. Someone knowledgeable about both history and bureaucracy had assembled this application with precision, highlighting the structure's unique construction. Thomas Palmer's role it as a community pillar and the shed's function as a sanctuary for vulnerable individuals during periods of social distress, without specifying details that might embarrass living persons. Sarah began completing the owner's portion of the application, her signature on each page feeling like both a declaration of war against Frank Whitmore and a commitment to her newfound heritage. By designating the shed a historical landmark, she would be anchoring herself permanently to Riverdale, to the complex legacy of the Palmers and Harringtons, to the truth her mother had fled decades ago. The implications weighed heavily as she worked through the night compiling supporting documentation from Thomas's journals, carefully redacted to protect privacy, photographing the shed's architectural features, and drafting a statement about its significance to local history. Dawn was breaking when she finally finished the completed application, a testament to her resolve. She'd make copies before submitting it. Insurance against accidental loss in a town where Frank Whitmore's influence reached into every institution. As she sealed the envelope, headlights swept across the kitchen window. A vehicle was coming up the driveway far too early for casual visitors. Sarah peered through the curtains, relief flooding through her as she recognized Mike's sedan. Her brother, Marcus, had arrived a day early unannounced. The moment of reckoning she'd both dreaded and craved was upon her. Mike emerged from his car, looking travel-worn and concerned. At 38, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man comfortable in his skin, broad-shouldered from years of military service, his dark hair showing the first threads of silver at the temples. Nothing in his appearance suggested he knew he was returning to his childhood home, to the place where he'd once drawn stars on shed walls, because he couldn't see the real ones. Sarah opened the door before he could knock, the siblings regarding each other in loaded silence. Did he see the questions in her eyes? Could he sense the seismic shift in her perception of him, of their shared history? "You look like hell," Mike finally offered, setting down his overnight bag. "Daniel, okay?" "He's fine, sleeping." Sarah stepped back to let him enter, searching his face for any sign of recognition, any hint that he remembered this house, this town, his life as Marcus. "You didn't have to come early." Mike shrugged off his jacket, his movements displaying the efficient economy she'd always attributed to his military background, but now recognized might have deeper roots, the hypervigilance of a child who'd learned to exist quietly to avoid drawing attention. "Your text worried me. Family history isn't exactly your usual conversation starter." He surveyed the kitchen, gaze skimming over the historical application materials spread across the table, settling briefly on Thomas's journalman before returning to her face. "What's going on, Sarah?" The question hung between them, laden with decades of unspoken truths. Sarah touched the locket at her neck, gathering courage. "I found something in Grandpa Thomas's shed. Something about us, about Mom." She gestured to the chair across from hers. "You might want to sit down for this." Mike complied, wariness evident in the set of his shoulders. Is this about Elena Harrington? The name spoken so matter-of-factly in her brother's deep voice struck Sarah with the force of a physical blow. He knew. All this time he'd known. You remember, she whispered, the realization stealing her prepared speech. Mike's expression softened, a complex blend of relief and regret. Not everything, fragments mostly. The shed, the stars. He gestured vaguely upward. A man with kind hands who smelled like pipe tobacco. Thomas, Sarah's voice caught. Our grandfather. I figured that out eventually. Mom, Rebecca, never confirmed it directly, but I pieced it together over the years. Mike ran a hand over his face, fatigue evident in the gesture. I remember being afraid all the time, hiding when cars came down the driveway, drawing stars because the real ones were forbidden to me. Sarah pushed Thomas's journal across the table. Did you know about me that I was born here in the shed? Mike's hesitation told her everything. I had impressions, a baby crying during a storm, Mom telling me I had to be extra quiet because you were a secret. His gaze dropped to the journal, then back to her face. When I was 17, I found my original birth certificate in Mom's safety deposit box. Marcus James Morrison. It confirmed what I'd suspected, but by then our life as the Palmers was so established, I didn't see the point in confronting her. Why didn't you ever tell me? Sarah didn't bother hiding the hurt in her voice. And say what? Hey sis, guess what? We're actually the scandal of Riverdale, the shameful secret of the mighty Harrington family. Mike's bitter laugh held no humor. Mom had rebuilt our entire existence to protect us from that legacy. Who was I to tear it down? Sarah absorbed this, trying to reconcile the brother she thought she knew with this man who had carried such knowledge alone for years. You remember the Harringtons? Not directly. I've researched them, though. Mike's expression hardened. After Mom changed our names, moved us to the city, I had these nightmares. A woman with perfect posture and cold eyes threatening to take me away from Mom. When I was old enough, I looked into the Harrington family, connected the dots with what little Mom had let slip over the years. Did you know Frank Whitmore is our cousin? Mike's sharp intake of breath answered that question. Eleanor's nephew? He's here in Riverdale? Sarah nodded grimly, summarizing her encounters with Frank. The suspicious inspection, the trespassing, and finally Harold's revelation about the spring and Frank's water rights scheme. Mike absorbed this information with the focused intensity she recognized from his military days, when strategic thinking superseded emotional reaction. So our cousin wants this property for the water rights, but has no idea his disgraced aunt's grandchildren are the current owners. That's my working theory, Sarah confirmed, though I'm not sure how long that identity advantage will last. Small towns have long memories, and I've been asking questions. Mike stood abruptly, pacing the kitchen with restless energy. We should sell. Take whatever he's offering and disappear. This place, he gestured expansively, it's not worth the risk of the Harrington machine turning against you and Daniel. I'm applying for historical landmark status for the shed, Sarah countered, pushing the application toward him. It would block any development of the spring. Mike stared at her, incredulous. You're deliberately picking a fight with the richest man in the county, a man who, by your own account, already has the building inspector and sheriff's office in his pocket. His voice rose with each question. Sarah, this isn't just about property rights or family history. The Harringtons destroyed our mother's life over propriety and family reputation. What do you think he would do to protect millions in potential water rights? I'm not Mom, Sarah fired back, rising to face him. I won't be chased away from what's rightfully mine, what's rightfully Daniel's. This property is our heritage paid for with Thomas's sacrifice and Mom's suffering. It's a house, Sarah, boards and nails and memories better left buried. Mike's expression softened slightly. I know you're struggling right now, the job lost, the move, but this crusade won't fix what's broken. This isn't about fixing anything. Sarah's voice dropped to a fierce whisper, mindful of Daniel sleeping upstairs. It's about standing ground that should have been defended decades ago. Thomas protected Mom when no one else would. Now it's our turn to protect what he left us. Their standoff was interrupted by footsteps on the stairs, Daniel rubbing sleep from his eyes, brightening immediately at the sight of his uncle. Uncle Mike. He launched himself across the room, previous grogginess forgotten. Mike caught him in a practiced hug, his entire demeanor shifting from confrontational to nurturing in an instant. "Hey, buddy, sorry if we woke you." Daniel's attention quickly shifted to the materials spread across the table. "Are those about the star maps? Did Mom show you what I found in the shed?" Mike's expression flickered with something unreadable as he glanced at Sarah. "Not yet, buddy. Why don't you show me?" Sarah watched them head toward the back door, Daniel chattering excitedly about constellations and secret messages, Mike's arm protectively around the boy's shoulders. The parallels were impossible to miss. Another child finding wonder in the shed, another adult wrestling with its complicated legacy. Through the kitchen window, she observed their progress across the dewy yard, Daniel gesturing dramatically as he unlocked the shed door with the key he now proudly carried. Mike hesitated at the threshold, one hand braced against the doorframe, as if gathering courage before stepping inside. Sarah remained at the window, giving them privacy for what must be an overwhelming reunion. After several minutes, Mike emerged alone, his face ashen in the early morning light. He walked to the oak tree at the yard's edge and pressed his forehead against its trunk, shoulders heaving in what could only be silent sobs. The sight of her stoic brother breaking down cracked something in Sarah's chest. Whatever arguments they might have about the future of the property, the past had just become viscerally real for him, in a way research and fragmented memories couldn't match. She slipped outside, approaching cautiously. "Mike," he straightened, wiping his face with embarrassment. "Sorry, it just hit me all at once. The smell, the light through those windows." He gestured vaguely toward the shed where Daniel remained obliviously examining star patterns. "I remembered hiding under the workbench when strangers came, drawing those stars while Mom told me stories to keep me quiet." Sarah touched his arm gently. "It's your history too. You have as much right to it as I do." "That's just it." Mike's voice had the raw quality of newly uncovered truth. "I've spent my entire adult life trying to escape being Marcus Morrison, the unwanted Harrington bastard. Built a whole identity separate from that foundation. College, military career, everything on my own terms." His gaze drifted to the shed where Daniel was now visible through the window, tracing patterns on the wall. "And now it's all rushing back like it happened yesterday." "Maybe that's not entirely bad," Sarah ventured. "Remembering where we came from, what shaped us." Mike shook his head. "You don't understand. Mom didn't just change our names to protect us from gossip. The Harringtons were trying to take me away from her, legally through the courts, using their money and influence to paint her as unfit. When they discovered she was pregnant with you by yet another unsuitable man," he trailed off, jaw clenching at the memory. "They were vicious, Sarah, and Frank Whitmore is cut from the same cloth." Before Sarah could respond, Daniel called from the shed doorway, waving a piece of paper excitedly. "Mom, Uncle Mike, I found another map hidden in the wall. This one has words on it." They converged on the shed where Daniel proudly displayed his discovery, a yellowed sheet of paper that had been concealed behind a loose board near the floor. Unlike the star drawings, this was clearly the work of an adult. A roughly sketched map of the property with precise markings and notations in Thomas's distinctive handwriting. Mike took the paper with reverent arm, studying it intently. "It's a survey map. Look, he's marked the spring water table depths flow rates." His finger traced a particular notation near the shed. "And this is something else entirely." Sarah leaned closer, reading the faded pencil marks. "Proof buried here or down tin box. For Elena when she returns." Their eyes met over Daniel's head, the implication clear. Thomas had left something buried near the shed. Something he considered important enough to document, but not retrieve, something intended for Elena if she ever came back to Riverdale. "We have to dig it up," Daniel declared, practical as always. "I'll get the shovels." Before either adult could respond, he darted toward the garden tools leaning against the house. Sarah and Mike exchanged another look, part trepidation, part curiosity. "Whatever it is, if it's been underground for decades, it might be damaged beyond recovery," Mike cautioned. Sarah nodded, but her determination had already solidified. "We have to try." Thomas wouldn't have gone to such lengths if it wasn't important. The morning sun climbed higher as they took turns breaking the hard-packed earth beside the shed foundation, following Thomas's measurements precisely. Daniel appointed himself excavation supervisor, bringing water and tracking their depth with meticulous attention. At 3 feet down, Mike's shovel struck something solid. Carefully, they cleared away the surrounding soil, revealing a rusted ammunition box of the type military supplies were often packaged in during the mid-20th century. With reverent care, they lifted it from its resting place. Heavier than expected, its contents shifting slightly with movement. The metal had corroded in places, but the watertight seal appeared intact, preserved by the relatively dry soil beneath the shed's protective overhang. They carried it to the porch, gathering around as Mike carefully pried open the stiff latches. Inside, protected by oilcloth wrapping, lay a stack of documents, photographs, and a small reel-to-reel tape recorder with several labeled tapes. Sarah gently lifted out the topmost item, a legal document with the Harrington family crest embossed in the corner. As she unfolded it, her breath caught. It was a contract dated 1951 between Richard Harrington and Thomas Palmer, transferring ownership of the 5-acre parcel, including the farmhouse, for the sum of $1 and other valuable consideration. Below it lay a second document, a handwritten confession by Richard Harrington admitting to fabricating evidence against Thomas in a property dispute, using his influence to manipulate local courts and threatening Thomas's livelihood unless he revealed Elena's whereabouts. "This is blackmail evidence," Mike murmured, scanning the pages. Thomas was protecting himself and Mom in case the Harringtons came after them again. Deeper in the box, they found photographs of Richard Harrington meeting with known criminals' ledgers, documenting suspicious financial transactions, and most damning of all, a series of threatening letters sent to Thomas, demanding he turn over Elena and Marcus, or face consequences ranging from foreclosure to physical harm. The final item in the box was a sealed envelope addressed simply for Elena's children. With trembling hands, Sarah broke the wax seal, extracting a single sheet of paper covered in Thomas's careful handwriting, to Marcus and Sarah and any others who may follow. "If you're reading this, you've returned to where your lives began. The enclosed evidence was my insurance policy against the Harringtons' power, mutually assured destruction that kept them at bay after your mother fled. Richard would never risk his reputation and fortune, even to satisfy Eleanor's obsession with family legacy. The spring on this property is the true source of the region's water, pure, tested, valuable beyond measure. The Harringtons have always known this, coveted it, but the land is yours by right and legal deed, purchased with my silence about their misdeeds. Whatever Elena has told you of your beginnings, know this. You were born of love and courage, raised in the face of terrible odds, protected at every turn by a mother who chose your welfare, fair above all else. The choice of what to do with this evidence in this land, I leave to you. May you find the peace that eluded your mother in this place." With boundless affection, Thomas Palmer. Sarah lowered the letter, meeting Mike's stunned gaze over the box of evidence that had waited decades to be discovered. "This changes everything," Mike said softly, reaching for the property deed with newfound reverence. "No," Sarah corrected, certainty settling over her like a mantle. "This just confirms what I already knew. This land is ours, by right, by history, by blood, and I'm not going anywhere." The siblings sat in silence, the magnitude of their discovery settling between them like a physical presence. Whatever Frank Whitmore had planned for the Palmer property, he was about to discover that some family legacies couldn't be erased, and some secrets, once unearthed, became the most powerful weapons of all. The dawn air carried the earthy scent of freshly turned soil as Sarah and Mike transferred the ammunition box and its contents to the kitchen table. Daniel, fascinated by their discovery, hovered nearby until Sarah gently suggested he explore the attic for more clues while the adults talked. "This is legal dynamite." Mike spread the documents, carefully organizing them by date. Tax fraud, witness, intimidation, political corruption. The Harringtons were running this town like a feudal fiefdom. Sarah examined the property deed again, noting details she'd missed in the initial shock of discovery. "Look at this transfer date, April 30th, 1952, just days before I was born." Mike nodded, recognition flashing across his features. "Thomas was securing our future, getting legal ownership of this land before Mom gave birth, ensuring the Harringtons couldn't claim the property if something happened to him." "Smart man." Sarah traced her finger over Thomas's signature. He knew exactly what he was up against. They spent the morning cataloging the evidence, creating digital backups of every document, with Sarah's phone then securing the originals in a fireproof lockbox Mike had brought from his car. Neither spoke the obvious aloud. Such precautions wouldn't be necessary if they weren't anticipating confrontation. Shortly after noon, the sound of tires on gravel announced a visitor. Through the kitchen window, Sarah spotted Frank Whitmore's luxury SUV coming to a stop beside Mike's sedan. "Showtime," Mike muttered, sliding the lockbox under the table with his foot. "Want me to handle this?" Sarah straightened her shoulders, decision already made. "No, this is my house, my fight." Frank emerged from his vehicle, today's expensive suit exchanged for what appeared to be his version of casual attire. Pressed khakis and a polo shirt that probably cost more than Sarah's entire wardrobe. He approached the porch with the confident stride of a man accustomed to deference, faltering only slightly at the sight of Mike standing beside Sarah in the doorway. "Ms. Palmer." Frank's practiced smile didn't reach his eyes. "I was hoping we might continue our conversation about the property. I didn't realize you had company." Sarah matched his false warmth with her own. "My brother Mike Morrison. He's helping us settle in." The name Morrison registered immediately in Frank's expression, a flicker of recognition quickly suppressed. He extended his hand toward Mike with recalibrated assessment. "Frank Whitmore, I don't believe we've had the pleasure." Mike's handshake was deliberately firm, his military bearing on full display. "Just arrived this morning. Sarah's told me all about your interest in our family property." The emphasis on family wasn't subtle. Frank withdrew his hand, recalculating his approach. "Perhaps we could discuss this inside. The offer I'm prepared to make might surprise you." Sarah gestured toward the porch swing. "We're quite comfortable out here. The weather's perfect." Refusing to enter the house disrupted Frank's power play, forcing him to negotiate on neutral ground. He hesitated briefly before taking the offered seat, producing a leather portfolio from beside him. "I'll be direct. This property has significant development potential that you're likely unaware of. I'm prepared to offer 3 times its appraised value. Cash, immediate closing, no contingencies." He slid a document across the small porch table. "You'd be free to pursue opportunities elsewhere without the burden of maintaining this." He gestured vaguely at the aging farmhouse. "Historical liability." Sarah let the offer sit untouched. "What development do you envision for 5 acres of agricultural land, Mr. Whitmore?" Frank's smile tightened at her deliberate obtuseness. "The Palmer parcel completes a larger assemblage I've been acquiring. The entire project encompasses nearly 200 acres. Focused around the spring in our back acreage," Sarah added casually, satisfaction blooming at Frank's poorly concealed surprise. "The one that feeds the regional aquifer." Frank recovered quickly, recalibrating his approach. "You've done your research. Then you understand the economic opportunity here. Boutique water bottling, ecotourism centered around natural springs. The potential revenue stream is substantial." "For you," Mike interjected, "while depleting a natural resource that currently serves the entire community freely." Frank's attention shifted to Mike, reassessing him as more than just Sarah's tag-along brother. "Progress always requires change, Mr. Morrison. The question is whether your sister wants to profit from that change or be marginalized by it." "Is that a threat?" Sarah's voice remained steady despite the accelerating beat of her heart. "Merely an observation. Small towns evolve or die. Riverdale needs this development to survive." Frank leaned forward, switching tactics. "Your grandfather understood the value of practical compromise. He was a reasonable man." The invocation of Thomas ignited something fierce in Sarah's chest. "Was he—" "I've been reading his journals. They paint quite a different picture of Thomas Palmer and the Harrington family." The name landed like a physical blow. Frank's expression froze, his calculated charm evaporating. "I'm not sure what you're implying." "I think you are," Sarah countered. "Eleanor and Richard Harrington, your aunt and uncle, if I'm not mistaken." The porch fell silent, save for the distant call of birds. Frank's composure cracked momentarily, something ugly and defensive flashing behind his eyes before he regained control. Ancient history, he dismissed with practiced casualness. "Riverdale has moved well beyond old family squabbles." "Has it?" Sarah reached inside the doorway, retrieving the historical landmark application she'd completed overnight. "Because I'm designating the shed as a protected historical site effective immediately upon approval." Frank scanned the document, his facade of civility thinning with each page. "This is absurd. That dilapidated outbuilding has no historical significance. The Heritage Council disagrees. They have already accepted the preliminary application. Sarah's bluff was calculated. Barton had made no such confirmation, but Frank wouldn't know that. The shed's unique construction and its role as a sanctuary during periods of social upheaval make it quite significant to regional history. Frank's laugh held no humor. Social upheaval. That's a creative interpretation. Would you prefer I be more specific? Sarah leaned armsward, lowering her voice. About Elena Harrington. About what your family did to her and her children. The blood drained from Frank's face so rapidly, Sarah feared he might faint. He stared at her with new eyes, no longer seeing a desperate single mother he could easily intimidate, but something far more threatening. Who are you? The question emerged as barely more than a whisper. Mike shifted beside Sarah, a subtle move that placed him between her and Frank. I think you have already figured that out, cousin. The word hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Frank stood, abruptly, portfolio forgotten, as he backed toward the steps. This conversation is over. I'll be speaking with my attorneys. Do that. Sarah remained seated, projecting a calm she didn't entirely feel. And while you're at it, you might want to explain why your surveyors were trespassing on our property last night. Frank's retreating footsteps faltered momentarily. I don't know what you're talking about. The sheriff's department has the report, and we've installed security cameras. Another strategic bluff. The cameras were still in their packaging inside, but Frank's reaction confirmed her suspicion about the trespassers. He reached his vehicle without further comment, the SUV's tires spraying gravel as he accelerated down the driveway. Sarah released the breath she'd been holding, hands trembling, now that the confrontation had passed. That went well. Mike's dry assessment broke the tension. Nothing like declaring war on the most powerful man in the county before lunch. Sarah gathered the scattered papers from the porch table. We didn't start this war. The Harringtons did decades ago. And now we've painted targets on our backs. Mike followed her inside, closing the door firmly behind them. He'll come at us with everything he's got, Sarah. Legal challenges, building inspections, tax audits, death by 1,000 bureaucratic cuts. Let him try. Sarah tucked the historical application into her bag. I'm submitting this today, then meeting with a lawyer in Madison County, someone with no connections to Riverdale or the Whitmore sphere of influence. Mike regarded her with a mixture of admiration and concern. When did my little sister become such a fighter? Sarah gestured around the kitchen, to the evidence box, to the shed visible through the window. When I found out who I really am, who we are. Daniel's footsteps thundered down the stairs, interrupting their moment of connection. He burst into the kitchen, brandishing a dusty photograph album. Mom, Uncle Mike, look what I found in the attic. The album contained photographs spanning decades. Thomas as a young man standing proudly beside a newly built shed. Thomas with a dark-haired young woman who could only be Elena. And most striking of all, faded color Polaroid of a solemn-eyed boy around 4 years old sitting on the porch steps with a baby in his arms. That's us, Mike whispered, touching the image reverently. I remember this moment. You were crying and Mom asked me to hold you while she helped Thomas fix something in the kitchen. Sarah studied her brother's face and profile, seeing the boy in the photograph reflected in his adult features. The same determined set to his jaw, the same protective posture. She wondered how she'd never recognized it before. We're framing this one, she decided, carefully removing it from the album. The Madison County Courthouse stood in stark contrast to Riverdale's quaint municipal buildings, a modern glass and steel structure housing various government offices, including the Heritage Council. Sarah approached the records desk with the historical application tucked securely in her bag, Mike and Daniel waiting in the car outside. I'd like to submit this application for the landmark designation process, she explained to the clerk, sliding the completed forms across the counter. The young woman accepted the paperwork with practiced efficiency. Let me check if Mr. Barton is available. He handles all initial reviews. Sarah's pulse quickened at the name. James Barton, he actually visited my property yesterday. The clerk frowned slightly. That's unusual. Mr. Barton rarely conducts site visits until after preliminary approval. She tapped at her computer. There's no record of a scheduled assessment for the Palmer property. Sarah's suspicion crystallized into certainty. Could you verify if Mr. Barton is actually working today? A few keystrokes later, the clerk confirmed what Sarah had begun to fear. He's out of the office at a preservation conference in Chicago, has been all week. The man who had entered her home, who had warned her about the burdens of historical designation, had been an imposter, almost certainly sent by Frank to gather information and discourage her application. I'd like to speak with security, please. Sarah kept her voice steady despite the chill spreading through her. And I need to ensure this application is processed immediately. An hour later, after filing a police report about the fraudulent inspector and having her application officially date-stamped and entered into the system, Sarah rejoined Mike and Daniel in the car. Someone impersonated a county official to get into our house, she summarized, buckling her seatbelt with unsteady hands. Mike's expression hardened. Frank's not wasting any time. The real Mr. Barton will review the application when he returns next week. Until then, we have temporary protected status. No alterations to the property can be made while designation is pending. Their drive back to Riverdale was subdued, each adult lost in thought while Daniel dozed in the back seat. The confrontation with Frank had escalated matters beyond simple property negotiations. By revealing their knowledge and their identities, they'd entered unknown territory. As they crested the final hill before the Palmer farm, Sarah gasped. 3 county vehicles were parked in their driveway. The building inspector's van, a sheriff's cruiser, and what appeared to be an animal control truck. What now? Mike accelerated, slightly protective instincts engaged. They pulled up behind the assembled vehicles to find Lisa Mercer, the building inspector, affixing a bright orange notice to their front door. Deputy Collins stood nearby, looking uncomfortable as always, while a third official Sarah didn't recognize peered into the windows. Miss Palmer. Lisa straightened, her tone professionally detached. I'm serving notice that this property has been deemed unsafe for habitation, effective immediately. Sarah exited the car, keeping her voice level despite the audience of officials. On what grounds? We've addressed most violations from your previous inspection. New concerns have emerged. Lisa consulted her clipboard. Potential asbestos in the attic insulation, structural instability in the northeast corner, and reported raccoon infestation in the walls. Raccoons. Sarah couldn't contain her disbelief. We've been here for days without seeing any sign of wildlife inside. The animal control officer stepped forward. Anonymous tip came in this morning. Caller reported hearing scratching in the walls, possibly rabid animals. Mike joined Sarah, positioning himself slightly ahead of her. Let me guess. This anonymous tip came right after Frank Whitmore returned to his office. Deputy Collins shifted uncomfortably. We're just doing our jobs, sir. You have exactly 1 hour to gather essential belongings. Lisa continued, ignoring the tension. The property is condemned until all violations are remediated and verified by county officials. Sarah felt Daniel's small hand slip into hers, his earlier excitement replaced by confusion and fear. Where are we supposed to go? That's not within my jurisdiction, Lisa replied, her gaze sliding away from Daniel's worried face. There's a motel on Route 16 that offers weekly rates. Mike stepped closer to the inspector, his military bearing intimidating despite his calm tone. We'll need to see the full inspection report, including documentation of these alleged new violations, and will require a second opinion from an independent inspector. Thus, you're welcome to appeal through proper channels. Lisa's brittle smile didn't reach her eyes. The forms take about 2 weeks to process. The coordinated attack was so transparent, it bordered on absurd, yet carried the full weight of local authority. Sarah glanced at the shed, still standing, silent witness at the back of the property. Whatever happened to the house protecting that structure remained paramount. Daniel, go with Uncle Mike and pack what you need for a few days, she instructed, keeping her voice steady for her son's benefit. Your school things, clothes, and pick 3 toys. As Mike led Daniel inside, Sarah approached Deputy Collins, deliberately stepping out of earshot of the other officials. I want to file another report. Someone impersonated a county official to gain access to my home yesterday. Madison County has already documented the incident. The deputy's discomfort increased visibly. You'll need to come to the station for that. I also want to inform you that we've discovered significant evidence of historical criminal activity involving the Harrington family. Sarah held his gaze steadily. Evidence we've secured off-site with instructions for its release to state authorities if anything happens to us. Collins glanced toward the other officials, then back to Sarah. Miss Palmer, I don't know what game you think you're playing. No game, deputy, just a friendly warning that the balance of power in Riverdale isn't as absolute as some might believe. Sarah turned toward the house, conversation concluded. We'll comply with the evacuation order, for now. 90 minutes later, the Palmer farmhouse stood empty behind bright orange condemnation, notices its new occupants forced to retreat to the only accommodation available on short notice. Harold and Loretta Jenkins' guest room. You'll stay as long as necessary, Loretta had insisted when Sarah called explaining their situation. This is exactly what the Harringtons did to your mother, using bureaucracy as a weapon. Now, as evening settled over Riverdale, Sarah sat on the Jenkins' back porch while Daniel played with their elderly golden retriever in the yard. Mike had departed for the county seat to meet with a lawyer specializing in property disputes armed with copies of their evidence against Frank. Frank's overplaying his hand, Harold commented, joining Sarah with 2 mugs of coffee. Pushing you out this aggressively will raise questions in town. Sarah accepted the steaming mug gratefully. He's scared. We know too much, and he can't be certain what evidence we have. It's more than that. Harold settled into the chair beside her. You're the living embodiment of the Harrington family scandal. You and Mike both. Your very existence threatens the carefully constructed Whitmore identity he's built here. A car door slammed in the front yard, followed by hurried footsteps around the house. Loretta appeared at the porch door, expression tight with concern. Sarah, there's someone here you should see. Rebecca Palmer stood in the doorway, looking smaller than Sarah remembered, her usually perfect appearance showing signs of hasty travel, wrinkled clothes hair escaping its customary neat bun. Her gaze darted around the unfamiliar kitchen before landing on Sarah. What have you done? The question emerged as barely more than a whisper. Sarah stood frozen, the shock of seeing her mother, Elena, in Riverdale rendering her momentarily speechless. Mom, how did you know where to find us? Mike called, said I needed to come immediately. Rebecca's hands twisted together, a nervous gesture Sarah had rarely witnessed. He said you've stirred up the past, that you're in danger. Loretta stepped forward, recognition softening her features. Elena Harrington, after all these years. Rebecca flinched as though struck. Nobody calls me that anymore. That person doesn't exist. She exists in every breath you take, Loretta countered gently, and in the children you raised. The tension might have stretched indefinitely if not for Daniel's timely entrance. Through the back door, his excited chatter about the dog faltering as he noticed the unfamiliar atmosphere. Grandma, his uncomplicated joy, pierced the emotional standoff. Are you staying for a sleepover too? Our house got condemned because of raccoons, but I don't think they're real raccoons. Rebecca's expression transformed at the sight of her grandson, maternal warmth temporarily displacing the fear that had dominated her features. Hello, sweetheart. I'm not sure about sleeping over, but I needed to see you and your mom. Harold tactfully ushered Daniel back outside to finish playing with the bike, leaving the 3 women alone in the kitchen. Rebecca sank into a chair, the journey and emotional strain evidently taking their toll. You shouldn't have come back here, she began, eyes fixed on the tabletop rather than meeting Sarah's gaze. This place, these people, they destroy lives. The only thing destroying lives is silence, Sarah countered, taking the seat opposite her mother. Decades of secrets, of running, of denying who we are. Who we are. Rebecca's laugh held no humor. Do you think I changed our names on a whim, that I cut ties with my family for entertainment? The Harringtons would have taken Marcus away, institutionalized me, erased us from existence to protect their precious reputation. Frank is already trying to erase us. Sarah pushed a copy of the condemnation notice across the table. He's using the same playbook your parents used against Thomas. Legal harassment, false accusations, bureaucratic bullying. Rebecca scanned the document, her complexion paling further. Franklin, of course it would be him. She looked up, real fear etching lines around her eyes. You need to leave. Today. Take whatever offer he's made for the property and disappear. I can't do that. Sarah leaned forward, willing her mother to understand. This land is our heritage, bought with Thomas's sacrifice and your courage. I won't surrender it to the people who tried to destroy our family. Heritage, Rebecca's voice cracked on the word. There's no glorious heritage here, Sarah. Only pain and fear and small-town cruelty dressed up as moral concern. There's also this. Sarah retrieved the photograph she'd found in the attic. 4-year-old Marcus holding baby Sarah on the porch steps. And this. She touched the locket at her throat. And the shed where I was born, where you found shelter when no one else would help you. Rebecca's hand reached involuntarily toward the photograph before withdrawing. Thomas should have burned it all after we left, every trace. He preserved it, Sarah corrected gently, for when you returned. He believed you would someday. He was a foolish optimist. Rebecca's bitterness couldn't quite conceal the underlying pain, always seeing the best in people even when they showed him their worst. He also left evidence, Sarah continued, watching her mother carefully, against the Harringtons. Insurance, he called it, in case they ever came after you or us again. Rebecca's head snapped up. What evidence? Sarah summarized their discovery of the buried ammunition box, the documents proving the Harringtons' corruption, the property deed transferring ownership to Thomas just before Sarah's birth. It's our leverage against Frank, she concluded. He can't touch us without risking exposure of his family's past crimes. You think evidence from 50 years ago will stop a man like Franklin? Rebecca shook her head, despair evident in every line of her body. The statute of limitations has long expired on anything Thomas documented. At best, it's embarrassing family history. At worst, it makes you an even greater threat that needs to be eliminated. The harsh assessment hung in the air between the mother and daughter at an impasse born of fundamentally different responses to the same traumatic history. Rebecca had survived through escape and reinvention, while Sarah sought validation through confrontation and truth. A vehicle pulled into the driveway, its headlights briefly illuminating the kitchen. Moments later, Mike entered, his expression grim until he registered Rebecca's presence. Mom. He crossed the room in 3 strides, enveloping their mother in an embrace that spoke volumes about their shared history, a protectiveness that had its roots in those early days of hiding, of being Marcus to her Elena partners in survival. Rebecca clung to him briefly before pulling back to study his face. You remember this place? It wasn't a question, but Mike nodded anyway. Fragments, enough to understand why you left, why you became someone else. Then help me convince your sister to do the same. Rebecca turned pleading eyes towards Sarah. Frank Whitmore has his grandfather's ruthlessness without his occasional restraint. This isn't a fight you can win. Mike's expression grew troubled as he joined them at the table. The lawyer confirmed what we suspected. Frank's using his influence to orchestrate the condemnation. But he also found something interesting about the spring on our property. He produced a folder of documents, spreading them across the table. The water source isn't just valuable for bottling, it's critical. The aquifer levels throughout the county have been dropping for years. Within a decade, Riverdale's municipal water supply will be insufficient unless they tap into new sources. Let me guess, Sarah studied the hydrogeological maps. Our spring connects to the last untapped portion of the aquifer. Mike nodded. Frank's not just acquiring land for a boutique water business. He's positioning himself to control the entire region's water supply, a resource that will only become more valuable as climate patterns continue to shift. The stakes suddenly expanded beyond family history or property rights into something approaching public interest. If Frank gained control of the spring, he'd effectively hold the future of Riverdale hostage, able to dictate terms to the very community that had once enabled his family's power. This changes the dynamic, Sarah realized, mind racing with possibilities. It's not just our fight anymore. The entire town has a stake in preventing Frank from monopolizing the water supply. Rebecca's expression darkened. You think the good citizens of Riverdale will rally behind Elena Harrington's illegitimate children against one of their own? You're more naive than Thomas ever was. They might rally behind the truth, Sarah countered. Frank isn't one of them. He's a transplant from Boston who changed his name to sound more folksy and relatable. He's manipulating this town just like his grandparents did. A distant rumble of thunder punctuated her words, the promise of an approaching storm lending urgency to their discussion. Mike checked his watch, concern flickering across his features. Daniel should be in bed. Tomorrow's going to be challenging enough without adding sleep deprivation. The reminder of Daniel's presence, the innocent third generation caught in this inherited conflict, sobered the adults. Rebecca rose first, maternal instinct, apparently transcending her fear of being recognized in Riverdale. I'll see to him. Some things don't change no matter what name you're using. After she'd gone to find her grandson, Mike turned to Sarah, lowering his voice. We need to talk about Mom. Having her here complicates everything. She's our mother, Sarah objected, and she has more right to this fight than either of us. She's also a traumatized woman who fled this place in terror. Being back here, seeing that shed confronting the past she's spent decades escaping, it could break her, Sarah. The truth of his assessment struck deep. For all Sarah's determination to embrace her newly discovered heritage, Rebecca had lived it, endured the rejection, the hiding, the fear of discovery. Her escape hadn't been cowardice, but survival. Her reinvention, not denial, but protection for her children. What do you suggest? Sarah's question was genuine, her certainty wavering for the first time since discovering the shed's secrets. Mike sighed heavily. I don't know, but charging ahead without considering the psychological toll on her feels wrong. Thunder growled again, closer now, the storm approaching, with the same inevitability as their confrontation with Frank Whitmore. Sarah moved to the window, watching lightning illuminate the darkened countryside in brief, brilliant flashes. A storm is coming, she murmured, the words carrying weight beyond the literal weather. Just like the night I was born. The parallel wasn't lost on Mike. History doesn't have to repeat itself. Mom fled during a storm. We could choose differently. Sarah turned from the window, decision crystallizing. You're right, we will choose differently. Instead of running from the Harringtons, we're going to expose them, and Frank, publicly. How? The historical designation hearing. Sarah's mind raced ahead, assembling a strategy. It's a public forum, recorded for county records. We present our evidence there, not just about the shed's historical significance, but about the spring, the water, rights, Frank's true identity, all of it. Mike looked skeptical. You think the Heritage Council will allow that? They won't have a choice if we bring media attention. Sarah pulled out her phone. One call to the Madison County Register about Boston businessman Frank Whitmore attempting to seize control of regional water supply should guarantee coverage. The brewing confrontation took shape in Sarah's mind, not a furtive struggle of legal maneuvers and bureaucratic weapons, but a public reckoning. The Harrington-Whitmore dynasty had thrived in shadows, their power exerted through whispered threats and behind closed doors manipulation. Dragging their methods into the light might prove their greatest vulnerability. We'll need Mom's participation, Mike pointed out, ever practical. Her testimony about what happened here 50 years ago would be devastating, coming directly from her. Sarah nodded slowly. I know, and I won't force her. This has to be her choice. The sound of footsteps on the stairs announced Rebecca's return. She looked exhausted, but somehow more composed, as if the simple act of tucking in her grandson had restored some essential part of her identity. Daniel's asleep, she reported, reclaiming her seat at the table. He asked me to check under the bed for raccoons. The absurdity of the moment, the fabricated pretext for their eviction reduced to a child's monster under the bed fear, broke the tension momentarily. All three Palmers shared a brief, genuine smile of familial connection. Mom, Sarah began carefully, we need to ask something difficult of you. Rebecca's expression closed immediately, the wariness replacing the momentary warmth. I won't testify, I won't sign affidavits. I won't put my name on anything that connects me to Elena Harrington. We're not asking you to reclaim that identity, Mike interjected gently, but we are asking you to help us protect what Thomas saved for us, for you. Sarah reached across the table, not quite touching her mother's hand, but offering the possibility of connection. The Heritage Council hearing for the shed's historical designation is next week. We want to use that forum to expose Frank's water rights scheme and his family's history of corruption. A public spectacle, Rebecca's voice dripped with disdain. Dragging our family's worst moments into the town square for entertainment. Not entertainment, justice. Sarah leaned forward, intensity bleeding into her tone. Not just for us, but for Thomas, who sacrificed everything to protect you. For everyone in Riverdale who deserves to know their water supply is being quietly monopolized. And what would you have me do? Rebecca's question emerged fragile, vulnerable, in a way Sarah had rarely witnessed from her typically composed mother. Just be present, Mike answered. Stand with us. You don't have to speak if you don't want to. Rebecca fell silent, conflict evident in every line of her body. When she finally responded, her voice carried the weight of decades of careful self-preservation. You're asking me to dismantle the walls I've spent a lifetime building, to willingly step back into a nightmare I barely escaped. We're asking you to finish what you started, Sarah countered softly. Not as Elena Harrington, but as Rebecca Palmer, the woman strong enough to escape, to rebuild, to raise two children alone, rather than submit to the Harringtons' control. The storm broke overhead, rain lashing against the windows with sudden fury. Rebecca flinched at a particularly violent thunderclap, her gaze drawn to the darkness beyond the glass. It was a night like this, she whispered almost to herself. When you were born, the shed roof leaked in the corner. Thomas kept apologizing as if the weather were somehow his fault. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. You came so quickly, barely 2 hours of labor. Loretta said you were impatient to meet the world. The rare glimpse into her birth transfixed Sarah, her mother's words painting a picture more vivid than any journal entry. Marcus, Mike, was so proud to be a big brother. Rebecca's gaze softened with the memory. He sang to you when you cried, made up little songs about stars and moonbeams. It was the only time he forgot to be afraid. Mike's expression revealed his own surprise at this revelation. A piece of himself he hadn't remembered, a tenderness preserved only in his mother's memory. We left 3 months later. Another storm, though not as violent as tonight. Rebecca's voice strengthened as she continued, as if the act of speaking these long-buried truths was somehow liberating. Thomas drove us to the bus station in Madison County, 3 towns away, where no one would recognize us. He gave me an envelope with cash identification papers, contact information for a woman in the city who could help us find housing. The narrative spilled from her, now decades of silence finally breaking. I became Rebecca Palmer that day. Invented a dead husband, a conventional background, a reason for my children having different complexions. Trained myself to forget Elena's voice, her mannerisms, even the way she signed her name. Sarah hardly dared breathe, afraid any interruption would stem this unprecedented flow of truth from her habitually reserved mother. I called Thomas once a year, and always from different payphones, never saying where we were. He never asked, just told me about the weather, his garden, mundane things that couldn't be traced. Rebecca brushed at her eyes impatiently. The last time we spoke was 2 weeks before he died. He said the spring flowers were exceptional that year, that the shed was waiting whenever I was ready to come home. And the simple statement, "Come home," hung in the air between them, Thomas's faith in eventual reconciliation extending beyond his lifetime through the careful preservation of their history. Rebecca straightened, suddenly decision evident in the set of her shoulders. I'll attend your hearing. I won't speak unless absolutely necessary, and I won't use the name Harrington, but I'll stand with my children. The declaration, so simple yet profound, marked a turning point as significant as any legal victory. Whatever happened with Frank, with the property, with the Heritage Council, the 3 Palmers had already reclaimed something precious that the Harringtons had nearly destroyed. Their truth, their connection, their shared history. Thank you, Sarah managed, emotion thickening her voice. Rebecca nodded once, brisk and practical once more. We'll need a strategy. Franklin will have attorneys, political allies, possibly hired supporters in the audience. We have evidence, Mike countered, and public interest. The Madison County Register is running a story about the water rights issue tomorrow. And we have something Frank doesn't, Sarah added, certainty filling her chest. We have the truth, not just documents or testimony, but living proof of what his family did, what they tried to erase. Rebecca's expression revealed skepticism tempered with grudging admiration for her children's determination. Truth doesn't always win in Riverdale. The Harringtons taught me that lesson thoroughly. Maybe not 50 years ago, Sarah acknowledged, but now, with social media, county recordings, public records laws, Frank can't hide behind closed-door deals the way his grandparents did. The storm continued to rage outside, but within the Jenkins kitchen, a different kind of weather was clearing. Decades of silence giving way to planning, to strategy, to unified purpose. 3 generations of Palmers, each shaped differently by the same foundational trauma, finding common cause in confronting its source. As midnight approached, they finalized their approach for the coming days. Sarah would pursue the historical designation while gathering community support around the water rights issue. Mike would work with their attorney to challenge the condemnation order. Rebecca would prepare herself for the inevitable recognition and questions her presence in Riverdale would generate. Before retiring to their temporary bedrooms, they stood together at the window, watching the storm gradually diminish into steady rain. Lightning still occasionally illuminated the countryside, briefly revealing the silhouette of the Palmer farmhouse in the distance, condemned but not defeated, waiting for their return. When I was hiding in the shed, Rebecca spoke softly, her reflection visible in the rain-streaked glass. Thomas told me something I've carried all these years. He said courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about finding something you value more than your fear. Sarah placed a gentle hand on her mother's shoulder, feeling the tension and resolve beneath her touch. What did Elena value more than her fear? Rebecca turned, meeting her daughter's gaze, directly for perhaps the first time since this journey began. Her children. Always her children. The simple truth, more powerful than any document they discovered, united the three of them in that moment. Whatever Frank Whitmore might unleash against them in the coming days, he would face not just Sarah Palmer and her brother, but the culmination of a legacy of protective love that had endured across generations, weathered storms both literal and figurative, and emerged intact. A legacy that had begun in a humble shed during another storm 50 years earlier, when Elena Harrington had chosen her children over everything else. A choice that Rebecca Palmer now honored by standing beside them in the fight to preserve what remained of that courageous beginning.